Simon Mabon lectures in international relations and the Middle East at Lancaster University. Iran says the US has crossed a big red line. How do you expect Iran to respond to these US attacks?
Well, the short answer is we just don't know. We don't know how Iran will respond. We don't know what type of response it will pick. We don't know which types of targets it will pick. We don't know if it will respond towards the US directly or if it will go against some of the US allies in the region. We don't know if it will limit its attacks to Israel and try and outmaneuver the US in this regard and playing a bit of geopolitical chess, if you will, with Washington, or if it will just escalate with direct attacks on US forces, US bases, etc., or perhaps it will be just a broader global disruption by closing the Straits of Hormuz and then relying on its allies, such as the Houthis, for example, to close the Bab el-Mandeb and really disrupt global trade, the flow of oil, gas. It would be, it's really difficult to ascertain exactly what it will do. And part of this is contingent on the strategic reserves that Iran has left after these 20 waves have hit Israel, and also the will of the Islamic Republic to continue to fight against Israel and indeed now the United States.
Is Iran's Supreme Leader still a target?
Well, we know that Donald Trump said that he wasn't a target as yet. But I think in saying that suggested that he was indeed a bit of a target, and there was a thinly veiled threat that he was a target there. And given what Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying about regime change not being a direct strategic goal of this latest set of operations, we don't know for sure if the Israelis would go after Ali Khamenei, the Supreme Leader. But there's no doubt that if he was killed in a targeted airstrike, there would be serious repercussions. And that would be the latest in a long line of flagrant breaches of international law by all the different parties involved in this conflict. So it's a really precarious and really worrying situation for a whole host of reasons.
What about for Iran? How key is the current Supreme Leader to the regime keeping itself intact?
Well, he's been in power for a number of decades now. He is the figurehead, if you will. He's the symbolic head. He's the strategic and the ideological, spiritual leader of the Islamic Republic. So he plays a really key role. But we shouldn't just reduce the Islamic Republic of Iran to one figure. If Ali Khamenei did die or indeed was killed in a targeted assassination, that would not lead to the fall of the Islamic Republic just on its own. Indeed, we know that in the past couple of days, he's listed 3 names. We don't know those names as yet. And put those forward to the Assembly of Experts to choose his successor in the event of his death. So there's obviously a clear planning process in place right now. He matters. Of course he matters. But it's the figure that matters perhaps more than the man, if you will.
And what about when it comes to international diplomacy? Iran's foreign minister plans to meet Russia's President Vladimir Putin Monday for talks. What do you think could come out of that?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one because we've heard lots of different rumors coming around. We know that Iran and Russia have got a long, complex relationship. Not all good, we must stress. Russia invaded Iranian sovereignty, breached Iranian sovereignty during the Second World War, along with others. So there's a complex history there. But in recent years, Russia has provided a degree of support to Iran. But we know that Russia hasn't provided the types of things that Iran might perhaps have wanted. We don't know if Russia is going to provide the type of support that it gave to Iran's key ally, Bashar al-Assad, a decade ago, which ultimately ensured his survival, at least for a few more years. So whether this is just about diplomatic cover, whether this is about economic support, or whether this is about strategic or indeed military support, we just don't know, and that's part of the issue with global diplomacy right now. There's a lot of different moving parts, lots of different agendas. We know that Iran has sent tech and drones to Russia to use in Ukraine. So there's a lot of different moving parts, and it is a very worrying time right now.
How might these US attacks on Iran influence regional dynamics then? Do you foresee increased instability in the region?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on what Iran does next. And going back to my first answer, we just don't know what Iran is going to do next. We know that there are lots of different possible scenarios, but the route and the path that it chooses could take it in lots of different directions. So I think what is really important here is that we don't try and predict what's going to happen, but we know that there are lots of different possibilities. Given the number of US bases in the region, given the US military presence in the region, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, etc., we know that there are lots of viable targets, but that is contingent on whether Iran wants to pursue that line of strategy, and we just don't know.
Middle East expert Simon Mabon from Lancaster University, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Here's the full version of the US president announcing news of the attacks to the American people.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say, we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is calling for a rapid return to diplomacy. He says Iran must immediately enter into negotiations with the US and Israel to find a diplomatic solution to the conflict. He adds the German government believes large parts of Iran's nuclear program have been damaged by the airstrikes. Our political correspondent Paul Jäger has more. A fairly restrained initial reaction from the German Chancellor there. Can we expect more?
Yeah, so it is likely that we're going to see another statement from Merz or his Foreign Minister Wadefuhl in the course of the day. What we know so far, what you just read, is from an email that a government spokesperson sent out to the press this morning. Merz met with his security cabinet, that's his vice chancellor, his foreign minister, defense minister, among others, and they discussed the matter. And you said that they have the info that Donald Trump gave in his press conference, and now they will have to work closely together with their EU and US partners and see maybe to come up with a strategy, and then we can expect a new statement. But so far, this is all we have.
EU diplomats had already been meeting with the Iranian foreign minister in Geneva on Friday. Is that diplomatic avenue, has that come to an end?
Well, it's certainly not what Germany wants. Germany wants a diplomatic solution. That is why the E3, so France, Great Britain and Germany, the foreign ministers, met with their Iranian counterpart on Friday. Even after that meeting, Johann Wadefuhl, the German foreign minister, spoke pretty positively about it. He said, and I quote, that they had the impression that the Iranian side is fundamentally willing to continue talks on all important issues. Now, of course, that was before the US strikes tonight. And now the Iranian foreign minister said, tweeted that the US and Israel blew up diplomacy. But I think that still the German government is working right now, speaking to the governments of France and the UK to come up with a joint strategy, a joint position. And the position to mediate in this conflict, of course, has certainly not improved right now.
Paul Jäger, thank you very much for your insights. And let's bring in Brussels. Teri Schultz is there for us. Tell me about the EU's reaction to the US decision to bomb nuclear facilities in Iran, Teri.
You know, EU officials took their time in responding to the news that broke overnight. I started looking first thing this morning, and they hadn't said anything officially. But in due time, as they took stock of the situation, you did have responses on X from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, European Council President Antonio Costa, and EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas. Now, all of them are calling, not surprisingly, for diplomacy. Kallas and von der Leyen notably did say that Iran may not be allowed to get a nuclear weapon, a nuclear bomb. That was not a statement in Antonio Costa's post on X. So I don't know if we're seeing any divisions in emphasis here. Probably not, because the European Union's main point is really that diplomacy has to be the way out, that negotiations must continue. Let's not forget that the EU, at the time Federica Mogherini, was the final arbiter of the Iran nuclear deal that President Trump pulled out of in his first term. And EU foreign ministers just met with Iran's foreign minister in Geneva on Friday. So certainly for the EU, the only option is to keep talking with Iran.
Well, Iran's foreign minister says diplomacy is no longer an option after the US strikes. What options does the EU have to de-escalate the situation right now?
That is their only option. Obviously, they are not in any position to take any military action on this, and they wouldn't. So the only option, and the EU must be feeling quite frustrated at the moment, is to call for more talks. And certainly, if you look at the statements by the E3, the French, British, and German foreign ministers after their talks with Iran, admittedly there was no breakthrough there in Geneva, but they certainly thought they would keep talking, and they were also in touch with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the time. And so they may have been led to believe that while they hadn't been able to really crack this on that meeting, at that meeting Friday in Geneva, I think it would have been, understandable for them to think that they would have more time to continue talking, to try to head off the strikes that President Trump said may be possible within 2 weeks. I don't think that here in Europe, most people thought that that would be within 2 days.
So, Teri, is that what Trump would have been referring to recently when he said Europe won't be able to help with the Israel-Iran conflict when it comes to not having military options?
Well, I'm not among those who call themselves the Trump whisperers, so I don't know exactly what he meant. I would take this as just one more of Trump's many hits at the European Union, the way that he tries to talk down EU power. So he may well have already had in mind what he planned to do, even as the negotiations were going on with the E3 there in Geneva. He doesn't seem to hold EU power in much regard, so I can only imagine that that's what he meant.
Teri, you've also been covering NATO extensively for years. Could you think of a scenario where NATO countries have to intervene?
Well, those are two different things. NATO as an organization and NATO countries may take different decisions. NATO as a whole, I think it's inconceivable that NATO could be drawn into the Middle East. That's something it definitely does not want to do. And remember that there are 32 allies and any move has to be taken by consensus. But NATO countries make their own decisions. So if any country wants to join the U.S. Bilaterally, it's free to do so. Again, I can't fathom that at the moment, although I was covering NATO when Libya was something that you couldn't imagine NATO countries taking part in when Muammar Gaddafi was deposed. And in fact, that did draw in some countries, not as a NATO operation, but countries that are NATO allies. So that remains to be seen. I think everybody is waking up to this news and wondering what happens next. Certainly that wouldn't be the first choice of most European governments. I think everyone is a bit shell-shocked right now here in Europe and trying to figure out what happens next and hoping that that is more talks with Iran.
You sum that up so well. DW correspondent Teri Schultz in Brussels. Well, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Israel and US crossed a red line by attacking its nuclear facilities.
As all of you know, we suddenly faced with the aggression by American forces to our nuclear facilities. The Islamic Republic of Iran condemns in the strongest terms the United States' brutal military aggression against Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities. It is an outrageous, grave, and unprecedented violation of the fundamental principles of the Charter of the United Nations and international law. The warmongering and lawless administration in Washington is solely and fully responsible for the dangerous consequences and far-reaching implications of its act of aggression. The US military attack on the territorial integrity and national sovereignty of a UN member state carried out with genocidal Israeli regime, carried out in collusion with the genocidal Israeli regime, has once again revealed the extent of the United States' hostility towards the peace-seeking people of Iran, who will never compromise over their independence and sovereignty. The Islamic Republic of Iran continues to defend Iran's territory, sovereignty, security, and people by all means necessary against not just US military aggression, but also the reckless and unlawful actions of the Israeli regime. While President Trump was elected on a platform of putting an end to America's costly involvement of forever wars in our part of the world, he has betrayed not only Iran by abusing our commitment to diplomacy, but also deceived his own voters by submitting to the wishes of a wanted war criminal who has grown accustomed to exploiting the lives and wealth of American citizens to further the Israeli regime's objectives. The US act of aggression against Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities constitutes not only a flagrant breach of the UN Charter, especially the prohibition of the use of force under Article 2, Paragraph 4, and the obligation to respect the state's territorial integrity and sovereignty, but also a violation of UN Security Council Resolution 2231. It cannot be emphasized enough how much of a devastating blow that the US, a permanent member of the Security Council, has dealt to the global non-proliferation regime. The Islamic Republic of Iran reminds the United Nations, the Security Council, the UN Secretary General, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and other relevant international bodies of their duty and responsibility to take urgent and decisive action in response to this breach of international law. Silence in the face of such blatant aggression will plunge the world into an unprecedented level of danger and chaos. Humanity has come too far as a species to allow a lawless bully to take us back to the law of the jungle. The Islamic Republic of Iran calls on the Security Council to convene an emergency session to unequivocally condemn the criminal act of aggression by the United States against Iran and to hold the administration in Washington accountable for its violations of fundamental principles of United Nations Charter and of norms of international law. The responsibility of the IAEA and its Director General, who through evident bias in favor of warmongering parties paved the way for the current violence and bloodshed, is now clearer than ever. We call on the IAEA Board of Governors to immediately convene and carry out its legal responsibility in response to the dangerous US attack on Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities, all of which have been under the agency's full safeguards and monitoring. The world must not forget that it was the United States which, in the midst of a process to forge a diplomatic outcome, betrayed diplomacy by supporting the genocidal Israeli regime's launch of an illegal war of aggression on the Iranian nation. Not content with such malign actions, the United States itself has now also opted for a dangerous military operation and aggression against the people of Iran. In doing so, the US administration holds sole and full responsibility for the consequences of its actions, including the Islamic Republic of Iran's right to self-defense under the principles of the United Charter. In accordance with the UN Charter and its provisions allowing a legitimate response in self-defense, Iran reserves all options to defend its security, interests, and people. Thank you very much.
And let's now go to the Turkish-Iranian border, where DW correspondent Julia Hahn is. Julia, the Iranian foreign minister was visiting Turkey and he earlier spoke to reporters. What do you make of what he said?
Well, I think a very fierce reaction there from Iran was to be expected. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi spoke from Turkey because he was attending a meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Istanbul. I believe his response is the first from a high-ranking Iranian official. He said diplomacy was betrayed. What also stood out for me is that he called the Trump administration, quote, lawless, and the US attacks on several Iranian nuclear sites. An act of aggression, that is another quote, and he said Washington is now fully responsible for whatever measures Iran will take in retaliation. This is, of course, the political level. Here at the Turkey-Iran border, I had a chance to speak with people who are arriving from Iran, but also people who are returning to Iran right now, and I asked some of them what they think about the US joining the Israeli bombing campaign against Iran. I should mention that many people here do not want to show their faces on camera because they're afraid of the Iranian government, the Iranian regime, and their families inside Iran. But let's listen to what people told me.
With this United States action early this morning, I think all the situation is going to be changed completely from worse to worst. We were hoping to have a ceasefire, but with this action, with this bombing, I don't think it is going to happen.
Iran is also strong. America has now joined Israel's attacks, but they're not strong enough against Iran. Wait and you'll see. Iran will give a proper response.
This is a very bad situation. Hopefully it will pass. I feel very bad. I'm afraid for my family, and I'm afraid for the Iranian people. For everyone, actually. War is always bad.
For their own safety, those Iranians there didn't want to be identified. Tell me, how is the situation at the Iran-Turkey border right now?
Well, Turkey and Iran, they share a very long border, nearly 600 kilometers long. There are several border crossings, but this is the main crossing between the two countries. We've seen people arriving from Iran and people returning to Iran in the past days. But right now, the situation, or today at least, for the past few hours, the situation was more busy than in recent days. This is my impression. Turkish authorities, they have not shared any information regarding numbers on arrivals from Iran. The land borders are right now the only way to leave the country because Iran has closed its airspace. So we meet a lot of people who actually have a second foreign passport, who are now getting into Turkey and then trying to move on to European countries, the US, wherever they are, whatever country they're a citizen of. So right now there's no indication that we're seeing a massive influx of refugees from Iran. The Turkish authorities in recent days have also said that there is no considerable increase or no out-of-the-ordinary situation here at the border. But of course, the situation is so volatile that might change.
And in Turkey, due to that volatility, are people concerned about this conflict widening, Julia?
Well, the Turkish Foreign Ministry has actually just warned that the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities risks escalating the Israel-Iran conflict to a global level with, quote, catastrophic consequences, and that they are deeply concerned about these consequences. This is being echoed by people here in the region. I mean, Turkey is a direct neighbor of Iran, so any spillover effects from this war, they would affect Turkey. A massive influx of Iranian refugees, for example. Remember, Turkey took in millions of refugees after the Syrian civil war started. So the government, of course, does not want these scenes to be repeated. President Erdogan also mentioned that he's concerned about possible nuclear leakage. So many factors here about which people who live here close to the border are concerned.
Is Ankara taking any visible steps there to secure that huge border or prepare for possible fallout?
Well, you have to know that this border has already been very securitized right now, right here. We can't see any additional visible security measures, but we've noticed that there are additional road checks on the way from the next bigger Turkish city, the eastern city of Van, on the way here to the border area. We also heard President Erdogan in recent days. He said Turkey would step up its deterrent capabilities, its air defense, and the production of medium and long-range missiles. And Defense Ministry officials, they've also said they've increased security along the border, but without providing specific details on what they did so far.
And Turkey has a complex relationship with both the US and Iran. How is it navigating that diplomatically?
Well, the Turkish president has held phone calls with the American leadership in recent days. He's in close contact with the Iranian political leadership. He has very strained relations with Israel. He has very harshly condemned the Israeli attacks on Iran, has defended Iran's right to self-defense. So I don't think that he can play any sort of credible mediator role here, because Israel would probably not accept that. He might have a certain degree of influence on the Iranian government, but we now see the Iranian foreign minister has already moved on, said he's going to travel to Moscow to speak with his close ally, or Iran's close ally, Vladimir Putin. Turkey did over the weekend say it is willing to facilitate any sort of talks that could lead to a diplomatic way out of the situation. But right now, I think new facts on the ground have been created, and it's very unclear how much room, how much space there still is for diplomacy at this moment.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive reporting, Julia Hahn, at the Turkish-Iranian border.